Hello and welcome to the Gooner Talk, back again with you guys for another episode of what is the Arsenal Tactical Breakdown Series, a show in which we look at the players that have been linked to Arsenal and break them down in a statistical and analytical way with the help of some expert insight. I'm joined today for what is becoming a regular feature for our Tactical Breakdown shows by European football expert Drew Thompson. How you doing, mate? You good? You well?
Hey, I'm good. How are you? Thanks for having me back as always, buddy.
Not bad. I'm more tired than you because obviously, you're able to watch Arsenal these days at a normal hour, and I'm not for the next couple of weeks or so. Did you enjoy last night's game against the All-Stars?
I did, and as everyone was talking about, I really enjoyed Havertz's goal and his subsequent tweet about it this morning. So yeah, that was perfect. So yeah, it's a good start to the day. So yeah, I'm enjoying it.
Yeah. No, it was. I was over the moon with Havertz not only scoring, but giving it a bit of that on social media. Have that, I think, was the tweet, which was fantastic. So yeah, very, very, very happy indeed regarding that. Right, let's go into talking about today's player, which is Mohammed Kudus or Kudus. How do I pronounce this correctly, Drew? You're going to be better than me at this sort of thing.
Kudus.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I'm going to give it my best shot. Every time I've said Kudus before. I've said Kudus, and I've been corrected by our Ghanaian listeners in the comment section, berating me for my pronunciation, which they are absolutely within their rights to do. So Mohammed Kudus is hopefully, I hope at least this summer, going to become an Arsenal player. But the latest, just to give you kind of an indication about who, or rather what is going on in the situation with Kudus. The link from the Mail is where kind of this main link is coming through on Sami Mokbel, who is very well kind of connected regarding Arsenal. And he suggests that there is an interest from Arsenal in the player. Now, very quickly, Drew, I think what we find is when we see a link to a player, obviously a lot of subsequent pieces get written by idiots like myself, kind of breaking these players down, doing videos on them, which kind of creates this sense amongst the Arsenal fan base that maybe the player is closer to moving to Arsenal than the reality of the situation. Certainly my understanding is that Arsenal's interest is interest at the moment, and that's what it is. It's not a bid, it's not negotiations with Ajax, it's an interest that Arsenal could potentially pursue the player, and it does seem that they need to move some players out before any kind of moves will happen, be that for Kudus or for somebody else. But what do you make of kind of the latest on this link?
I mean, well, firstly, I like it. Before anything about Kai Havertz came, up to the boil, this is a player that I kind of advocated for in and around the World Cup. Another Adam Vogue, I know a lot of you listeners will know who Adam Vogue is. He did a lot of work on it as well, and we both kind of chatted a few times about. We pegged Kudus as a player we wanted to come in for that left 8 role before anything happened with Havertz. But his versatility still kind of shines through in a way that if you look at it this past season for Ajax, he almost exclusively played as a right winger and a center forward. He only featured a fair few times in central midfield. So he was utilized, in the areas that we know for a fact that if we do a deal late on in the window, we want to look at the forward line. So this, to me, would make a lot of sense given what he produced last season. I think he had 17 or 18 goals in all competitions last season. More importantly, he had 4 and 6 in Champions League, and that brings a lot of Champions League experience to a side who only between this summer and last summer we're finally starting to actually bring in pieces of players who have Champions League experience, right in line for the fact that Arteta, we know, wants to compete in Champions League, not just make up the numbers. So if we're bringing in profiles of players who have already been there, that helps us as well. As great as people like Saka and Martinelli and all of them are, they do lack that European pedigree a little bit. And the fact that you can bring in a player like Kudus who can fit into 3 different roles and do it at a Champions League level, that's how you know you're on the right track, right? So even if the league isn't super strong, for base value, it's a link that I absolutely love. And because he's versatile, he will get minutes. I don't think you would have to worry about spending money on a player who might get 5 stars. I think he'll start more than that. It's the kind of business that you really want to see. It's the kind of business that you know for a fact that you can say we have the depth and quality and a particular level that will help us compete on all fronts. And because we know Arteta wants to do that, we know Eddie wants to do that. Yeah, I'm happy if it actually comes to fruition. I don't know, but I think it's the kind of profile we want.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the key point around the versatility is absolutely key. I mean, this season he played 17 games on the right, 16 games through the middle, centre forward, and still played 9 games in what Transfermarkt describes as an attacking midfield role. Although what you often find is kind of these attacking midfield roles can also still be in wide areas, and they're misrepresented. So he's played plenty this season, which is a bit of a first because he has suffered with injury issues over the last few years. I think I saw Andy Brassel talking about the player yesterday, suggesting that really he's only had one full season. Even this season he had a couple of issues. He had a hamstring injury, missed 4 games. In 21-22, he had an ankle injury, missed 6 games. He fractured a rib and missed 13 games. And then the season before that, in 2021, he had a meniscal injury, which cost him 15 games, and then fitness issues in January cost him 6 issues after that, meniscal injury and the knock-on effect of that. But last season, getting in the amount of games that he did, 42 across all competitions, was obviously a really good return. 18 goals, as you say, across all competitions, 7 assists as well, 25 goal contributions. Came out really well and was a standout, as you say, for Ghana in his moments for the World Cup as well, which also raised his profile. In terms of other teams that are interested, we've heard that Brighton are potentially interested. That would be a bit of a coup, I think, for them, adding Kudus to the team, to the likes of Mitoma. And probably, as you say, if you like him in that 8 role, he'd probably be a good replacement for what McAllister has done, playing that kind of central attacking midfield, box-to-box style role. So, yeah, I think that's what you probably get from him if he was to move to Brighton. But for Arsenal, the fact he's played a lot on the right, I think, brings great competition to Bukayo Saka, which we need. And if Saka is out, Kudus slots in there. I think if you've got Havertz as well, and I know that we were talking off air and in the chat about the idea that both Havertz and Kudus coming in would be an amazing kind of dynamic for us, considering they're 2 players I know you've wanted at the club for some time. And so seeing both come in the same window would be rather impressive. But let's have a look at his FBRef profile. First of all, looking at kind of his attacking stats. What you first notice about him is obviously his goals and assists. These stats, by the way, when you look at FBref and you look at the stats for a player in the Eredivisie, it does make comparisons and percentiles for players in the leagues ranked, I think, 5th to 8th, rather than the top 5 leagues. So it's worth pointing that out in an FBref context. So that's why when we did the Yuri and Timber one, he stood out so greatly. But we can still have a good effect at kind of what area of his game stands out compared to other players in attacking midfield and wide positions. Goals are more so than assists. And I think it's the creation side of his game, Drew, which is certainly still needing development in that area.
Yeah, and I think that's why, if the move does happen, I think that's why we'd be looking at him in terms of a wide player, not a central player, where we have someone like, Havertz and Odegaard who are creative, and then even residually behind that, if we're going to say maybe use someone like Smith Rowe in the left 8, Fabio Vieira, those kind of players are more creative. I think his bread and butter is getting into goal scoring positions, getting into the box. The touches he gets into the box are incredibly important. And then if you actually filter his FBref numbers to focus on forwards and not attacking midfielders, you kind of see how he stacks up against forwards from the Eredivisie. It's actually quite strong. So I do think and you also saw that for Ghana in the World Cup as well, where even when he came into central spaces, he was always looking to get forward, get into the final third, get into a good goal-scoring position. His movement off the ball is very good. He's got a clean strike on the ball. So I think these are profiles that, similarly to Saka, who can be creative, but I think Saka's at his greatest threat when he's getting into a goal-scoring position. I think we all can kind of know and understand that when he tucks in, you're expecting at least testing the keeper, getting a goal. His goal-scoring levels last year kind of produced those numbers that you want to see. So I think with Kudus, I think that's kind of where maybe we'll see him shine bright. So I think that's also why Ajax and I moved him into more using him as a forward. Whereas at Noord-Zeeland, he was used in central midfield quite a bit. But as he moved to Ajax, they moved him further forward and on the right. And I think there's a reason for that. I think he's just a better goal threat than he is more essential creative threat. And there's nothing wrong with that. I think it actually suits everything that we need.
Yeah, I think it's demonstrated a lot in his possession stats. Take-ons attempted 98th percentile successful take-ons, 99th successful take-on percentage, 98. Tackled during take-on percentage, 99. Rarely is kind of in that position, tackled during when he's doing a take-on. That said, he does get dispossessed a fair amount as well, 3.21 times per 90, which leaves him in the first percentile, which is a rare stat you see in FBRef, a player being in the first percentile. He does get dispossessed, and I think that comes from still the raw side, perhaps, of his game, still being 22 years of age. He's got some development to come through. But what I want to do is get a little bit also onto the defensive side, and we'll do that when we come to the player comparisons. Comparing him to Saka, Trossard, Diaby, Trossard, a player that can play both centrally, as we're seeing at the moment, and in those wide areas, and did that for Arsenal last season, played centre forward, played wide left, thought would be a good comparison. Moussa Diaby is the most other notable wide player that we have been mentioned in links with, and of course Bukayo Saka is the current starting right winger and a player that might come in to compete with him. It only makes sense to compare the numbers with him. So we start with minutes played. Even though this is, by the way, for league statistics, so this is only the 30 Eredivisie games that he played last season, 1,789. What we found a lot, Drew, is that he was starting consistently in the second half of the season, but in the first 14-ish games, it was kind of like starting some, not so much starting others. Do you feel as though that represents him establishing himself in that Ajax team towards the end of the season and therefore showing that level of development that he's ready to make the next step?
Oh, no, 100%. There was rumors last summer that he may have actually been sold. Ajax were still not necessarily sure if he had a future at the club. And the first half of the season kind of showed that. But then the way he proved himself with Ghana, and then moving forward in the second half of the year, he kind of really exploded. And this goes to a comment that one of the listeners had said it before. I don't know the name, but SH342474 said he's from. You said that he's Danish. Didn't rate him at North Zealand, and there's part of that speaks true. Ajax usually, because their academy is so good, they usually, if they buy someone outside of the academy, usually they see something in that player. So they saw something in Kudus, but he didn't really hit the ground running. His first 2 seasons, he struggled, and they weren't sure about him last season, but he's kind of built up to that. He's matured quite a bit, and they found a role for him that's more suited to him, for me, which I think is actually as a forward, as a wide player, or as in the center forward channel. I think that suits his game, and I think the FBRef kind of backs that up. So I do think if you're looking at it in terms of bringing him in as a wide man, or even as a residual number 9, because he has played there as well, I think the picture becomes more clear. I think if we were looking at him maybe as a left 8, it would require a lot of refinement. And I think that's why maybe if it did go to Brighton, I think that would also make sense, because De Zerbi has done wonders for some of those young players as well. So I do think maybe that would suit him better than us. I think he'd be maybe off the standard for Arteta as a central midfielder currently. Not that he would develop later, which I think he could, but as a wide player, I think he could come in and automatically have an impact. And I think that's kind of why we're looking at it.
Yeah, we touched upon his kind of goals, and he does rank well. The highest goals per 90 compared to any of the other 3 on this list, 0.55 compared to Saka's 0.4, Trossard's 0.32, and Diaby's 0.3. But creatively is where he falls down. 0.15 assists per 90 compared to Saka's 0.31. Trossard's 0.48, been very creative for us, and Diaby's 0.27. However, what is interesting is despite his assists being low, his shot creating actions per 90 is still relatively good. Trossard ranked, I think, as the highest on that list, but they have the exact same shot creating actions per 90 metric at 3.41. So what is clearly happening, it's the quality of chances that he's creating isn't necessarily as high as the ones that Saka and Trossard are creating. So I think this shows potential. I think it shows that, he's not a creative player. He's a creative player that is more so leaned towards, as you said earlier, on goal scoring and getting into the box in dangerous situations. But he is willing to try and be creative for his teammates. He's just not refined that part of his game. Would that be fair?
Yeah, I think that's pretty spot on. I do think, Arteta said during the North American trip that he loves to use midfielders. And, there's obviously scope to suggest that maybe Kudus is a midfielder just being used as a forward, or maybe he's a forward that was just being used as a midfielder. No one kind of really knows where he'll land still, potentially. But if we know anything about Arteta and how he's been able to develop younger players, you can look at the good bits that Kudus does have and the things that need to be ironed out, and you can still see there's a profile of player in there that would, I think, flourish given Arteta's ability to bring the best bits out of a player. So I'm not, at this point, I kind of it's a little weird that it's very rare that I now question the players that we target. I think there's got to be a reason for it. And I think
Yeah.
whenever we've gone out and spent a considerable amount of money on a player, say 30, 40, 50 million, those players have all come good, every single one of them. And I think that speaks to the fact that we're not trying to know is there something about a player that he knows will fit into what he wants to do. It's about bringing the best bits out of those players collectively to suit whatever style he wants, whatever tactical schematic he wants. If he thinks that player can improve us, whether if it's in the 11 or the depth that we have, to make so that we're still competitive when we have to make changes, I do put faith in that. So I do think that I don't think he'll come in and immediately start matches. I don't think that's what it's going to be. I think you'll see him as Saka's deputy, rightfully so. But also, there's still space for him to come in one of the left 8 positions, maybe, depending on availability. There's still space for him to come in, maybe through as a number 9, depending on fitness and availability. And again, that's the whole point. The whole point is to bring in players who can play 2, 3, 4 different positions. It gives you something different. It gives you options, as long as it keeps the standard to a level where you're not going to drop off. And I think that's one of the issues we all know that we had last season. When we had to make changes, we were concerned about how the level drops. And that's why Saka couldn't come out ever. That's why he was so burnt out, right? We didn't really have a player that we could trust. I think I still think Reece Nelson could play on the right because, at academy level he played on the right, at Hoffenheim he played on the right, at Feyenoord he played on the right, but I do think you get 2 different players when you have Nelson as a right winger and Nelson as a left winger. And I do think maybe for what Arteta wants to do, he needs someone in a specific type of player for that right-hand side to bring out Nelson's ability to be that specific player on that left-hand side. So, yeah, I just think that it's hard to look at this as a bad move, but I do think fans would have to maybe sort of taper their expectations about how good he would be initially. I don't think it's one of those kind of Rice, Timber, Havertz skills will come in and make an immediate needle mover. I think Kudus would be more of a slow burner. I think you'll see good bits from him this season. You'll see some bad bits if the deal comes off, but I think it would be next season where you'll see, after that Arteta refinement, where you'll get like that player that fans would love. So.
Which I think is something to be said about a comparison with Fabio Vieira, and a lot of fans have written off Fabio Vieira this season because we've seen him have 1 year of transition. It was really hampered by injuries in pre-season and also during that winter period as well. And we'll see this season whether or not Fabio Vieira comes good. I've very much now got kind of a 2-season cut-off for where Arsenal are as a club. I think you get 2 seasons to prove yourself, and it's not happening after that. You need to be looked at as being replaced. I also think that, the idea that we bring somebody in and they're not going to provide an instant impact in the right wing role is more to do with the fact of the person they're going up against. Bukayo Saka is not going to be displaced. You're not going to find somebody that's going to give you a level playing field to compete with Bukayo Saka. You can bring someone in that you think has got the potential to do that, which like Kudus could potentially give some real good competition, but can also give some immediacy right now. Drew, I felt like you wanted to jump in. Go on.
No. I was reading the comments a little bit, see what people were saying, and I just had my own kind of just thoughts, but no, I do think, but I think that's accurate. And there's something also that I had chatted with Adam Vogue about maybe 3 weeks ago when we were trying to suss out, like where we're going with minute distribution and how that racks up against someone like Man City. People talk about that Pep rotates, but he does, but he doesn't. Pep really relied on the same 14 players last season and then sparsely with the rest of the squad. When you're challenging on all fronts, you need to use your best players as often as possible. That's the only way you win things. So Saka is still going to play heavy minutes. He'll still play 3,500 minutes across all competitions this season, maybe pushing, and that's okay because that's normally what happens with your best player. They play as often as possible. Thierry Henry did the same thing. Robert Pires did the same thing. Rarely were they ever dropped, one match off here and there, but they're starting every week. The key is, if you're going to use those players every week in the starting 11, you have to make sure that you don't use them for 90 minutes if you can avoid it. That's the key. The key is to have someone who can come in for Saka for 20 minutes, 25 minutes, when a match is done and dusted, and make sure he's not playing 90 minutes all the time. So if he's making 40, 45 starts, you have to just take some minutes off at the tail end of that. It's interesting that we talk about Moussa Diaby because Moussa Diaby featured 47 times for Leverkusen last season between Bundesliga, Europa League, and the DP Pokal. So he featured all the time. And that's okay because they didn't really have a player that could give Xabi Alonso that level when he wasn't in the 11. So, yeah, no, I don't think Saka's going to be displaced ever. But you still need someone who is competent enough to where you don't have such a drastic reduction in quality and playing level that it actually becomes detrimental. So, yeah, these are deals you need. So I do think Kudus could still do something for us for sure, but I don't think you're going to see it often. I still think he needs, like we said before, he needs some ironing out, some refinement, but there's still a player there.
Without a doubt, there is. Yeah. So let's see what happens. Obviously, we talked already about his ability on the ball. That shines through here. Successful take-ons, 4.57 is more than double that of any other player on this list. And not only that, but his success rate with those take-ons, 62.3%, is the only one over 50% of any of the others on this list as well. Very impressive indeed. It's the defensive side of a forwards game that always will come to the fore for Mikel Arteta. He wants players that are committed in both ends of the field, both in and out of possession. And I think that these statistics show that he fits still into that category. 0.95 tackles, 1 per 90. Only Saka has more, and it's only 0.01 more than him at 0.96. Trossard 0.52. Diaby 0.27. Clearances 0.65 compared to Saka's 0.54, Trossard's 0.16, and Diaby's 0.1. And lastly, recoveries as well, 5.43 recoveries compared to Saka's 3.6, Trossard's 4.44, and Diaby's 2.9. Out of possession, he still gives you that effort, which is really, really key and absolutely something that Arsenal are going to need. And I think probably shines from his time playing in midfield at Nordsjælland, as you pointed out. He's probably gained that ability to defend in midfield, playing in wide areas as well, and shines through in those areas. So we come to a verdict, Drew, on Mohammed Kudus. We talk about price. We have to talk about other factors. I see in the chat box, Samir said, what happens in the African Cup of Nations? Partey and Kudus will be gone. The point of doing deals like this and bringing in as much depth as we can is so that things like the African Cup of Nations don't affect us. And, Kudus, if we sign him, is a bonus. So if he goes in the African Cup of Nations, it's not going to be that big of a hit. We've signed Rice. We've got Jorginho. Losing Partey wouldn't necessarily be a problem either. But what's your verdict on we've not really seen too much regarding a price tag. I have seen suggestions between 30 and 40 million euros, potentially up to maybe even 40 million pounds. So 45 million euros to get a deal done. But, if the asking price of Timber was 60 million euros and we got that down to 40 plus 5, I'd be pretty confident in getting in between 30 and 40 million pounds.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. And I think currently you can obviously take it with a grain of salt, but I think his transfer market value is 40 million euros, so like 34 million pounds, give or take. And that's, as you said, it's probably right around where we're going to want to do a deal. I think a few factors come in. He has Champions League experience. He's played for a big club. He's young. So all those things would come into price. We're not going to get him for like 20 million pounds. It's just not happening. But I do think there would have to be a point where we'd have to cap it like anything. I think if Ajax want 40 million or over, I think we don't have to say, good luck, we'll go elsewhere kind of thing, just because he's not going to be, for me, an immediate 40 million pound player for us, whereas someone like a Timber, I think certainly will. I think Timber is well ahead of kind of the standard in terms of what we want in a player. I think Kudus has, again, had a lot of refinement is needed, so I wouldn't want to pay maybe that much personally. But overall, I think his profile is what we need. I think he is a player that we actually do need. Especially depending on how we move the pieces around the forward line in terms of how Arteta wants to use everybody, and the fact that now we're trialing Trossard essentially instead of out wide kind of tells me that Nelson will probably be used as a left winger, residually as a right winger, but usually mostly on the left. And then Smith Rowe as a left winger, maybe he can come in essentially as well, but it seems we do really need a right-sided player. I think he'll fit that bill.
Yeah, so. I think Smith Rowe will also be used as a rotational option with Ødegaard as well. Yeah. I think Smith Rowe's future is very much as a direct attacking 10, and I think he'll offer that as well. Yeah, while we've been live, Fabrizio Romano has just reported that Moussa Diaby will be joining Aston Villa for a fee in excess of 50 million euros.
That's a massive coup for them. That's a huge.
Yeah, it is a massive coup. What I would say, and I want to discuss the dynamic of this in relation to a deal like Kudus, because Arsenal could have afforded Moussa Diaby, right? They absolutely could have afforded to pay, I think, in around 40 to 50 million pounds to get Diaby. If they end up signing Kudus, say instead, hypothetically, do you think they would have got the better deal for, say, 30 to 40 compared to 40 to 50 for Diaby?
I think for what Arteta wants, yes. As much as I rate Diaby, and let's be clear, I think Diaby for me is one of the top wingers in Bundesliga over the last 2 years. He's exceptionally good as an attacking player. Where Diaby falls massively short is the defensive side of his game. He doesn't really press well, doesn't tackle well, doesn't read the lines very well. He's very much a kind of sit on the line, be direct, get into space, beat 1 or 2 men, drive forward. He's
I dare
not.
say Pepe.
Yeah, a little bit. There's a little bit of
Yeah.
I think it'll end up being a better player than Nicola Pepe is or was or whatever. But his deficiencies, I think, for me, are such that he just would not suit Arteta, and that's okay. And this is kind of what I mean about Town ID, where we've been linked with Diaby dating back to last season, but yet still we never pulled the trigger. And I think this is the reason why. I think he'll much more better suit maybe what Xabi Alonso has going on, or he better suited what Xabi Alonso has going on, rather than I think in certain ways will probably suit Emery as well. Because if you just sit deep and look to spring Diaby on the counter, that will suit what Emery maybe will do some of the time. But in terms of using a high press system with Arteta, needing a versatile player who is capable of not just being a winger, I think we'll get the better deal just because Kudus suits us better on a tactics than Diaby does. I think, but it doesn't mean Diaby will fail. I think that's a huge move for Villa. That shows their ambition clearly that they're going to push on for a top 6 place. They 100% will want to target Brighton this year, who might falter in Europe because they have Europa League. So that's good for them for sure.
Yeah, no, it's going to show kind of the level of competition there is in the Premier League and what they're doing. What I would say is, Villa have done business before where I've been like, oh, they got Emi Buendia, and I was very angry about that, and they didn't necessarily work out. But
I remember the discussions we had in the chat about Buendia. Remember that? Everyone was just like, yeah, it was good, but it's fine.
That was my most viewed video of 2021. Me ranting about the fact that Emi Buendia had gone to Villa. So, you can be annoyed about things. What I would say is, obviously, Unai Emery was the coach that wanted Zaha, and ended up getting Pepe as well. Diaby is a very similar style of signing, I think, to those. And Emery wants kind of attackers that are all about attack.
Chukwueze as well is similar as well.
Absolutely, that's why I've gone for him. And I think that when it comes to Arteta, he wants players that are going to give you a much more rounded performance, and Diaby compared to Kudus is just not that. But that's going to round off our show for today. Let us know in the comment section down below if you are and would be happy with the idea of Arsenal signing Mohammed Kudus. Just to stress this again, of course, the link right now is purely of interest. Arsenal have not made a bid. They're not in negotiations with Ajax, to our understanding at the moment in time. That could change. I think it depends upon outgoings first, and we'll see how that flows. But it's interesting I use the word flow to describe how this moves next, because it could be very much to do with following Balogun's future. So we'll see what happens in the next few weeks or so. Drew, thank you so much for your time, mate. Tell people they can find you.
You can find me on Twitter at xgrump90, which is pretty apt given my mood about Twitter in the last month. And you can I've got my work over at 101. And then I finally started a free Substack, but I'm focusing that on things away from just football, more about talking about things like mental health, issues with racism and prejudice, my love of traveling. So just more of like a personal blog that I share. If people want to read it, go for it. If you don't, it's fine. But that's kind of my way of moving out of football writing for when I have my own free time. That's also on Twitter as well. You can find it there. So thanks for listening, guys. And it was a good chat as always.
Always a pleasure to chat with you. Make sure you check out Drew's stuff. It's fantastic. At xgrump90, you'll find. I can tell you his FBRef stats for grumpiness are in the 99th percentile. So make sure that you check them out.
That's the best analysis you've ever done, Tom. Way to go.
What can I say? If you want to hear more of the analysis in person, you can do that by coming to our live event in London on the 13th of August, the Sunday. It's the day after the first game of the Premier League season against Nottingham Forest. I'll be joined by some other people that enjoy breakdowns of players, including FK and Latte Firm. Of course, Harry Simi from the Chronicles of a Gooner, Mike, our good friend Mike Feinberg, it's B-U-R-G, spelled incorrectly, Bailey Keogh from Your Boys. You can find us all at the events. Thank you to everyone that's already bought tickets. You can find a link to those tickets and where you can buy them down in the description. You'll find us at the Mildmay Club in London on the 13th of August. So thank you to everyone for listening. Do drop a like on the video, subscribe to the channel if you're new, share it around to people that want to find out more stuff about Mohammed Kudus. Thank you again to Drew. We will see you again very soon. And as always, up the Arsenal.